honored to share my testimony and my story today with you specifically. Whoa, I have not thought about dating in this way before. Maybe I shouldn't be having sex before I'm married. Maybe I shouldn't be watching pornography. She had cheated on me and I was really heartbroken by that. Why are all these bad things happening in my life all at the same time? I was like, God, what are you doing? Are you trying to reach me? Do I even believe that there is a God? Maybe I need to take a step toward God. And if I take a step toward God, then God will take a step toward me.
Challenge yourself constantly.
You have to be a little bit patient.
I felt like I was in a hole looking up.
The whole idea is you have to become content in singleness.
I'd be lying if I said I haven't fired off some Instagram DMs.
The word dating is not mentioned in the Bible.
I dedicated my life at Tomorrow World to Jesus.
Welcome to the Single Man Podcast, where we delve into candid conversations with Christian men about their journey to faith, advice for their younger selves, and navigating dating. With a heart to reach men from all walks of life, dive into real stories of redemption, growth, and the hope found in following Jesus. I'm your host, Carlton French, a 29-year-old single Christian, and I'm excited for you to listen to this week's episode. Let's jump into it. Hey, this is Carlton French. Welcome back to the Single Man Podcast. I am excited to be here today and for you to be listening as I share my testimony and my story on how I came to belief in Jesus and truly started to follow him at the age of 26, and how I am now a 29-year-old Christian man who is single, living in Atlanta, Georgia, and doing my best to follow Jesus on a daily basis. Let me start with where I was born and my upbringing. I am originally from Lawrenceville, Georgia, which is a suburb about 30 minutes north of Atlanta. I grew up in Lawrenceville, and I have two amazing parents, and I have two amazing younger sisters, and we haven't always been the closest family, to be honest, but one thing that I'll say my parents did a great job of, looking back on, was raising us in church, and specifically raising me in church. I went to church every week from when I was the earliest I can remember to when I was in 7th grade. And I was born in Lawrenceville, Georgia. We moved to St. Louis, Missouri when I was 3. We moved back to Atlanta when I was 7. And I have been in Atlanta ever since. And grew up in Alpharetta, Georgia when I moved back, and we were really plugged in at a church. My parents were involved in the leadership of the church. My dad helped run the finances of the church, and my mom helped run the soccer ministry at the church. And it was something that was just always kind of part of my life growing up. We were always around the church, and I would have told you that I was a Christian, that I believed in Jesus, that I had accepted Jesus into my life. I remember personally making the decision alone in my room when I was 7 to accept Jesus and say a prayer, and I wanted to get into heaven one day if I were to die. And so I thought that that's what I had to do. I had to accept this Jesus guy into my life. And so said this prayer, and really didn't know much about what I did or really truly understand anything about faith. I had never read any of the Bible. I never had prayed. I mean, I was 7 years old at this point. But how much can you really know at 7? But kind of went on through life from there, and would have said I was a Christian, but didn't really know what I believed. One thing that happened when I was 7, which was notable in my life, was I had this event happen where I was playing with my sisters in one of their rooms. We were like jumping on her bed and just having a good time as kids. And I remember jumping from this chest of drawers onto her bed, and somehow I hit my head, and I remember just totally being knocked out. And I don't know how that happened. Even now, I still don't remember what I did, but I remember just totally being knocked out and almost being like pulled out of my body to where I was seeing myself just laying on the bed with my sisters like shaking me and thinking like I'm completely out of my body, like what's happening. And I remember coming back into my body and not really talking about what happened with anybody. And I didn't even really remember the story until I was much later in my life, but it was something that I believe helped convince me and helped me to become a Christian 3 years ago. And so going on throughout my life, went to a good schools in the Atlanta, Georgia area, had decent friends all throughout growing up. We moved when I was in 7th grade from one school district to another school district, and it was just 15 minutes away, but completely changed my life in terms of the friends that I was hanging out with and the school I was going to and who I was surrounding myself with. And I had really put a lot of identity growing up into being someone that was good at sports, being good at school, and being someone that was very process and analytical oriented in life. And so when I moved, I really kind of leaned into those areas. I didn't really have any friends at the new school. And so I got involved continuing to play soccer. I played for the middle school team at the school I went to, and I was in, good classes. I was making, good grades, and slowly started to meet different friends. I got to high school and I hurt my knee playing basketball in the off season and had to get knee surgery. And that was really disappointing, I guess, because I was never able to play soccer again after that. And something that I had been really great at growing up and put a lot of identity in. And continued to go to school and be someone that was in, honors classes and AP classes, and just really focused on, okay, now I can't play sports anymore. Maybe I can work in sports one day and have this thing that I was passionate about and something that I really enjoyed doing be my career going forward. And even when I was in early high school, I was always very career oriented and goal driven, and something that I took into going to eventually college at Georgia Tech, which is a school in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's where I went to college from 2013 to 2016. And when I went to Georgia Tech, I studied finance and I got a scholarship to go to Georgia Tech and was in the honors program and had really like my whole life ahead of me, I thought. And I'd worked really hard in high school to get to that point. And now that I was in college, I wanted to continue to work hard to eventually get a good job one day. And so that's what I did, went throughout college, and I was focused on doing well in school. And to this point, I had never really been exposed to anything in a worldly sense, was still raised in church. We kind of stopped going to church as a family when I entered 7th grade when we moved school districts. I would have said that I was still a Christian, but really was struggling with a lot of things internally as to, okay, I have these rules almost and these laws that I've been taught since I was a kid of what to do. Like, don't have sex, don't get drunk, honor your father and mother. And I was like, okay, I don't want to face any wrath from God or be afraid to live. So let me just not do those things so that nothing bad happens to me. That was kind of my mindset and how I approached religion and faith. And so when I got to college at Georgia Tech, I wanted to get more exposed to the social scene and more of an aspect of making friends, and something I didn't really do much of in high school and middle school was, be around parties, be around drinking, be around people that were doing drugs or anything like that. And I'm thankful that looking back, I didn't have that exposure at a young age. But then when I got to college, I felt like I was almost sheltered in a way. And then I was exposed to really whatever you wanted to do. There were parties on the weekends. There were guys drinking. You could do pretty much whatever you wanted. And I was very cognizant as I went to Georgia Tech that I wanted to stay abstinent. And it's something that I was almost afraid to do, was to start drinking, because I had been exposed to pornography and masturbation at a young age when I was in late elementary school, early middle school. And it's something that I had been, unfortunately, looking back on, pretty addicted to, where it was just something that I did, and it's something that I didn't really know how to control, and it's something that I had been doing for such a long time at a young age that had just become part of who I was. And so I didn't want to get exposed to alcohol and then start having to always be drinking or become an alcoholic or something like that. And so I rushed my freshman year at Georgia Tech with the mindset, I'm going to be abstinent and I'm not going to want to be pressured to do anything I don't want to do. So I joined a fraternity that also had brothers in the fraternity who were abstinent, who weren't drinking. And the fraternity even had a Bible study that I attended a few times. And I was like, it wasn't a Christian fraternity, but it was a fraternity with guys from all different backgrounds, very diverse ethnicities, different sexualities even in the group, different guys that had grown up in different parts of the world even. People had come in internationally and been part of the fraternity. And I was like, wow, this is great. I'm going to get all these diverse opinions and guys to be my friends. This is awesome. And so I joined the fraternity, and I was abstinent pretty much completely until the very end of my freshman year, where I had been around the fraternity and I had been, working hard in school my freshman year. I got, good grades my freshman year, and it was toward the end of my freshman year, and I was at a fraternity party, and I was just thinking, like, all these guys are going places, they're getting jobs at great companies, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google. I'm like, all these guys are going places. I want to go places too, but I'm working really hard in school. They're working really hard in school. I'm not involving myself in the party scene, and they are, and they seem to still be doing great at life. So what am I really missing out on, almost, is what I thought. And so I was like, all right, I'll just try it and kind of see what happens. Not, seeing anybody else get in trouble. So surely I won't get in trouble either. So I started to explore drinking, and that led into me starting to explore, okay, I've never kissed a girl before. And this was my now sophomore year at Georgia Tech. And I felt like, man, I'm like so behind. I'm such a loser. I don't know how to talk to girls. All these other guys are doing great with women, and I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm going to die a virgin. And that's what I thought as a sophomore in college. And I was like, all right, let me explore this. And so I kissed a girl at a party one night, and that led to me losing my virginity later in my sophomore year. And it's something that I had held as something that I knew I wasn't supposed to do, but I didn't know why. I was like, okay, from when I was a kid, don't have sex till you're married. But I'm seeing other people do this, and they're not really facing any repercussions I'm seeing. And so really, why am I believing this? Like, do I really even believe in Christianity and God? And I had never read any of the Bible before on my own. I'd never said a real prayer before my whole life. And so I just kind of put my faith on the back burner throughout college, and then into being a young adult in Atlanta. I graduated from Georgia Tech in 3 years, and I started working in consulting, which is where I work still to this day. I had gone to college thinking that I wanted to work in sports, and I did a lot of internships throughout college for Georgia Tech's athletic department, for Auburn University's athletic department, for the Atlanta Braves, for the Atlanta Hawks, really trying to set myself up well so that when I graduated, I'd be able to get a good job. And I wanted to work in sports. And as I was getting ready to graduate, I found out that Deloitte had a sports consulting practice. And so that's why I applied to Deloitte. And I was like, well, I can get a higher salary as well if I start out in consulting. I don't have to do some entry level sales job in sports and make no money when I could start in this great role at Deloitte and try to get into sports that way. So that's what I did. Started at Deloitte at 21, and I was in a class of about 25 analysts who all were in Atlanta. Everyone was super smart. It was very impressive, to be honest, looking back on it. I was the youngest person out of 25. There were people that were, up to 24, 25-year-olds that were starting at the same time as me. And I felt like, wow, these people have it figured out. I'm just trying to like make it through here. And they became people that I looked up to as role models almost. And the culture at Deloitte when I started was one where you would fly out on Monday to your client, and then you would fly back on Thursday. I was hardly ever at my apartment in Atlanta, or I would come back and play video games during the weekend, and I would go out with friends, go out with coworkers, go to happy hours, go out to the bars, and just do really whatever I wanted to do, whatever other people were doing. And looking back on it, I wish I knew what I know now, what I knew then, because I feel like I wasted so many years of my early 20s. I moved back to Alpharetta, Georgia, in with my parents actually when I turned 22. My roommates, I had two roommates when I was living in Atlanta the first year after graduating. They both wanted to move out. And I was like, well, this is great. I'm never here anyway. I'll be able to save more money this way. So I moved back home at 22, and I ended up staying at home in Alpharetta with my parents until I turned 25. And it was way longer than I was expecting to be at home, and was way longer than, looking back, I probably should have been at home. But it taught me a few things being there, where I became very lethargic and complacent in life. And I had gotten a promotion at Deloitte into a new role. And I ended up on a completely remote project. So I wasn't even traveling for work anymore, except for a couple international trips I got to do, which were really cool. I got to go to Hong Kong and Dubai, which was awesome. But the rest of the time I was completely remote. And I was like, this is the life. I'm going to all these cool international cities for work. And then I'm like at home. I don't have to go to the office. I don't have to take these flights every week. I don't have to commute down to Atlanta. This is great. And so when I was at home, there were really no friends that I had that were back in Alpharetta. All my friends from college had still, either been in college one, or they had moved to other cities. And then I had friends at work, but they all lived in Atlanta. So I'd come down to Atlanta on the weekends, and I'd stay at people's houses and crash on their couches, and we'd go out to bars and party, or we'd go into the office for happy hours and things like that. And then when I was at home, I really didn't have anybody to hang out with. And so I started to play video games with friends who had lived in other cities. And that just kind of became what I did for 3 years or so. I just played video games and, worked during the day, and really didn't do anything productive at all. Looking back on it, just kind of wasted 3 years of my life. And when I turned 25, I was like, all right, this was 2020. I'm going to move back to Atlanta. I wanted to buy a house when I moved back, and I wanted to start taking dating more seriously, as I really hadn't thought much about dating at all to this point. I would go on dates here or there with girls that I met on dating apps, primarily as I was, living with my parents, and I was far away from young people, so to speak, in the suburbs. And that's what I did when I moved back to Atlanta. I ended up getting an apartment at a penthouse unit at a brand new building in West Midtown, which, if you don't live in Atlanta or you're not familiar with Atlanta, it's a very prominent and vibrant part of Atlanta with a lot of young people, a lot to do. And I was like, this is awesome. I got this penthouse apartment. I was the first one to sign a lease in the whole building. I got this great lease. I have this amazing skyline view of the city, and I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. I'm going to really take dating seriously, and I'm going to enjoy dating for the first time in my life. I've never really focused on dating before. I was starting to see friends of mine get into relationships at 25, and I had never been in a relationship myself at this point. And I was like, all right, I'm kind of falling behind in this area, is what I thought. And I deserve this. I have been working so hard in my life to get to this point, and I'm now at this great place to live, and I've made it. And this is something that I want to explore. I've never done before. And so I started to almost take dating and put it on a pedestal to where I was just laser focused on it when I moved back to Atlanta. I moved back in August of 2020, and that's kind of like almost became my hobby. I moved back and I would work during the day, and I would still, work hard, and I was doing great at work, getting great accolades, which was awesome. And then I would go on dates in the evening with girls that I met in Atlanta or through dating apps. And I was very cognizant during this season of life to not really think at all about faith, and was almost something that I would say I had become so distant from, and it had been so long since I had even like explored faith or thought even about what I believed, that it wasn't even something that really registered to me while I was dating in this season. I think I even had Christian on my dating app profiles at different points, but if someone had asked me, what is a Christian? What do you believe, Carlton? I wouldn't have even known what to tell them looking back on it. And to be honest, now knowing what I know, I wish someone had had that conversation with me, had asked me, Carlton, what do you believe? Why are you dating this way? What are you doing? And I just didn't have any friends or mentors in my life that were close to me to speak into my life in that way. And so that's one of my hopes for this podcast, to be a vehicle for single men to be inspired and learn that there's other ways out there. But I really regret a lot of the decisions that I made in that season of life when I moved back to Atlanta. And I hurt a lot of women, and I am regretful and had a lot of shame from that. But at the time, I was just doing what I thought everybody was doing. I thought everybody was going out on dates. I thought everybody was working on their career, trying to figure things out, and was trying to meet their partner and eventually get married. And so that's kind of what I did for the next year almost of being in Atlanta. I went on dates, and then this crazy thing happened where one night at my apartment complex, one of my neighbors shot a gun off her balcony 7 times. And this was a brand new apartment complex. Everybody had been kind of background checked, and it was supposed to be super safe. And I was like, well, this is this is not good. I'm going to move out of this place. And so I moved out, and I moved to where I live now, actually, in Old Fourth Ward, which is another little pocket of Atlanta. And I moved here into a 1-bedroom unit and have been in this part of town ever since for the last 3 years or so, since the spring of 2021. And so when I moved here, there was just like a lot of kind of turmoil almost happening in my life at the same time, with having to move out and me seeing different girls and going on dates and trying to figure out what was I really looking for. Okay, I had kind of like dated almost for fun and for practice, and had really made a lot of decisions which I regret now with women. And to now be at the point where there was all this turmoil happening, and I was looking for something to kind of keep me secure almost. And I'd been going out with one girl in particular for a few months now, and we became a lot closer through this process where I had to move. I actually moved to a part of Atlanta that was closer to where she lived, and I spent the next couple of nights at her place, and I was like, this will help me feel safer, and got a lot closer to her through that process. And we started to have conversations about what would it look like to become boyfriend, girlfriend, and to be exclusive with one another. And I had never been boyfriend, girlfriend with someone before, and um, really was not something that I knew almost how to lead in that relationship. We made a lot of decisions, which I look back on now and regret, where I had sex with her. We were staying in each other's apartments almost every night. And when I had the conversation with her about being boyfriend, girlfriend, I led the conversation with, well, what do you believe? What's your faith like? And looking back on it, I was like, not leading the relationship in a Christian or godly way at all. So what could I expect her? What could I have expected her to have done? But going back to when I was a kid, I thought, well, dating leads to marriage, and if I'm going to get married to this woman, then I'm going to have to raise my kids in church, because I was raised in church and I thought I had, a good life. I had made a good living for myself. I thought I had good values and morals. And so I'm going to want my kids raised in church. And so we had that conversation, and she had also been raised in church. And so I was like, all right, great. We can figure this out together. I got home that night and watched this series from a pastor in Alpharetta, Georgia, that we had been to his church a few times when I was growing up. And the series is called The New Rules for Love, Sex, and Dating. And that series really completely changed my life, looking back on it, where I was like, whoa, as I listened to that, I have not thought about dating in this way before. And I don't even know how this popped into my head to like even listen to this series. I had heard about it when I was a lot younger, and I was like, all right, well, now I'm dating. Let me figure out how to date in this Christian way. And so listened to that series, and I was like really convicted almost for the first time, like maybe I shouldn't be having sex before I'm married. Maybe I shouldn't be watching pornography. What does it actually mean to honor a woman? What kind of music should I be listening to? What should I be doing with my actions? And I started to make a lot of changes in the relationship with how I dated this girl. And I really put a lot more effort into the relationship. And as I put more effort into the relationship, it was weird. It almost drove her more away. And I found out into the second month or so of us dating, boyfriend, girlfriend, that she had cheated on me. And I was really kind of like heartbroken by that, and frankly, really devastated. And I thought that I really could trust this girl. And I was like putting more effort into the relationship and really thought that this could go somewhere, that this girl could be my wife. And that all came crashing down. And I started to talk to friends of mine at the time, like, what should I do? I don't know how to proceed in this. And pretty much all my friends I talked to and my sisters were like, you should stay in the relationship. Like, you can work through it. And nobody was seeing the relationship from a Christian perspective at all, except one of my friends who told me, dude, you got to end the relationship. Like, you can't trust her anymore. She cheated on you. And that friend of mine was a Christian, had become a Christian recently. And I was like, I think this makes sense. If you think about how you are being treated in a relationship, it's hard to see what's happening to you as wrong necessarily. But if you reframe it to what's happening to you, let's say it was happening to your mom or your sister or your best friend, would it be okay for them to be treated the way that you're being treated? And so I was like, if some guy did this to my sister and cheated on her, then she would need to end the relationship, because that doesn't work. And so that helped give me some clarity as I was so clouded with the relationship and how we had gotten physical. And it was really hard to discern what to do and decide what to do. And so through that breakup, I also had a few other things happening in my life at the time where I was expecting to get promoted at work, and I was going through this turmoil with my family all at the same time. And I was like, God, what are you doing? Are you trying to like reach me? I thought I was doing the right things, but also I don't even believe in you. Like, do I even believe that there is a God? Um, but why are all these bad things happening in my life all at the same time? I need to figure this out. And so I started to explore God, and if there really was a God, how could I be sure of that? And going back to my process oriented and analytical mindset, I was very focused on I can figure this out. Like I can't just have this blind faith in something. I'm going to look into what the experts say, what the evidence says, what the historical records show, and really come to a conclusion on what I really believe for the first time ever. And not just because I was raised in church, not just because I was raised a Christian or to think this way, that doesn't mean it's right. That would mean that people that are born in China and are Buddhist, or people that are born in India that are Hindu, or people that are born in Utah and are Mormon, they're all wrong. And I just happen to win this lottery and be born into a Christian home. That doesn't make any sense to me. So let me look into this. What do I really believe? And so I started to explore if there was a God. And I started to pray on a daily basis to have God reveal himself to me if he was real. And to this point, I had never said a prayer in my whole life. Literally, I had never said any type of prayer or tried to communicate with God before. And at this point, I'm 26 years old, and I just got on my knees every morning and I prayed, God, if you're real, reveal yourself to me in some way today. I want to see. And I heard about doing this from a series called Grown Up Prayers from a pastor in Alpharetta, Georgia, called Andy Stanley. And he talked about this story from the Bible in Luke chapter 18, verse 41. And I mean, I'd never read any of the Bible before. Literally, had not read anything, not even a verse. And that story he talked about really spoke to me, where there was a blind man who was crying out to Jesus to come to him, and he wanted to see. He had been blind his whole life. And he's crying out to Jesus, 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 I want to see, I want to see. And these people are around him and they're like, hey, be quiet. Like, stop bothering Jesus. And the guy's like, I want to see, I want to see. And so Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, which I didn't understand any of this context at this point, but now I understand it more, where Jesus was going to be crucified in Jerusalem, and he stops what he's doing to go over and see this blind man. And he goes to the blind man in Luke chapter 18, verse 41. You can read it for yourself. And he says, what can I do for you? And it's obvious, right? What the blind man wants him to do. He's blind, right? He wants to be able to see. But Jesus still asked the question, what do you want me to do for you? And it really struck me that maybe I need to take a step toward God. And if I take a step toward God, then God will take a step toward me. And so Jesus ends up healing the blind man, and he's able to see. And I was like, well, I feel like I'm blind in a lot of areas in life right now. I'm like super broken from this relationship and how I'd been dating and conducting my life and just being really a selfish person, and felt like I didn't have any friends. My family didn't know I'd been living, and I was just like, what am I doing with life right now? God, if you're real, I want to see. Help me to see what you're trying to do with my life here. So I started to pray that every day, and things kept happening in my life that I couldn't really explain. And I started to explore going back to church in person. And as I had exposure to really YouTube videos kind of between debates of people that were Christian and people that were Buddhist, people that were Hindu, people that were agnostic and atheists. And I started to really dive into the facts, like what really are the experts talking about? What really is the evidence for a God? What really is the evidence for one faith over another? And I really dug into that. And that led me to start going back to church. I started to go to one of the churches that Andy Stanley was the pastor of in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was really the only pastor I even knew of in the whole city through these sermons that I had been watching. And so I went to his church and I started to slowly become exposed almost to God working in my life, I would say, where things were happening I couldn't really explain in my life. And it must have been from God. The most notable thing that happened was one day I was out in Atlanta on what's called the Beltline, which is like a prominent walkway where people ride their bikes and walk their dogs and run and stuff like that. And there's a bunch of restaurants and shops on the Beltline. Had my my AirPods in, and I go into a grocery store here in Atlanta, and I'm gonna go do some shopping. And when you're at a grocery store, I feel like nobody ever comes up and talks to you. And I got to this grocery store, and immediately, like right when I go into the store, within the first minute, some guy comes up to me. And if you're not watching on YouTube, basically, he does this motion where he like asked me to take out my earphones. He's like, "Hey, take out your earphones, take out your earphones." And so till to this day, I've never had someone approach me at a grocery store after this, but he was like, "If God was here right now, what would you want to ask him?" is what he asked me. And I was like, what is happening? I had been praying for God to reveal himself to me probably for a month or two at this point. And I was like, this guy, is he like an angel or something? Like, what is happening? And so I talked to him and I'm like, all right, if God was here right now, I would want to know two things. One, when I was going to die, and two, when I was going to get married, as that was just top of mind for me with all the almost like heartbreak and just like disarray in my life at the time. Like, all right, when was I going to die so I can get my life in order? And two, when was I going to get married? As that was something I'd been so focused on as a single man, was dating and a relationship and getting married one day. And we had a brief conversation. I left and I was just like, that must have been, God must be trying to reach me. And so, long story short, I ended up coming to belief in Jesus. I had also started to go to a young adult small group in Atlanta through Passion City Church, which is the church that I still go to this day in Atlanta, Georgia. And I had found that ministry through Instagram, believe it or not, where I had followed some Christian accounts and some religious accounts on Instagram. And I got an ad one day for Passion City Church's young adult ministry. And I follow them. They follow me back, and then they send me a DM the next day and invite me to come to this young adult night that's happening. And I was like, oh, I see in their bio, it says 18 to 25-year-olds. And I just turned 26, and I was like, I'm 26. I don't know what this event about. And they invite me to come, send me the details. They're like, that's cool. Don't worry about being 26. Like, you're welcome to come. So I show up, don't know anybody. I'm still like super broken from the relationship ending. and just how I had been dating in general and the decisions that I had made. And end up meeting this group of guys who invite me to come and sit with them. And they invite me to their small group, which I had never been in a like all men's small group before. And, was kind of like distrusting of people really at this time. And I get back home, I like scroll up through the whole group me, which is like a messaging app that they invited me to. And I was like, are these a bunch of weirdos? Like, what's going on? And they seemed really nice. Like, maybe I should go check it out. And so I go the next week to the group and start to be exposed to these guys that just had seemingly like their life in order, and they had, great careers. They were very fit guys. And I was like, they have this joy about them, which I don't really understand and can't explain. And I don't have any joy really at all right now. So these guys have something that I don't have, and I need to figure out what it is. So I kept going to the group, and these guys just kept walking with me through my questions. And on my own, I was continuing to look into faith and, okay, I believe that there's a God, but what God is there? And I started to bring my questions to this group and to the guys in the group, and started to find out that as I started to share what I had been going through and with the breakup and dating and the questions I had about faith, that other guys in the group had similar experiences in their life that they were going through with breakups and dating and things that they were working through in their life. And I was like, I thought that I was the only one struggling or the only one that was going through these type of things. And I'm starting to see that there are a lot of other guys that are also going through this. And I had been almost conditioned to just like keep everything to myself. And I wasn't close to anybody previously to really share openly about what I had been experiencing and, what really was going on in my heart and in my soul as I processed through everything. And so I started to open up and be vulnerable, and other guys started to do the same. And I was like, whoa, I'm starting to feel almost like free from this breakup, from these sexual thoughts, from the desire to go on dates and the desire to get drunk and party and things like that. And I was like, if all this is happening, there must be something to this. And so still not convinced that there is a person named Jesus. And I started to look into, okay, now that I believe there's a God, which God is there? And so I started to explore different religions and, okay, what's the evidence for Buddhism, for Hinduism, for Christianity, for Judaism? Like, what is there a true religion? And I come to find out that really the differentiator between Christianity and other religions is the historical person of Jesus Christ, who in Christianity is claimed to be God in a body, the Son of God, who came to earth to pay for the sins of the world, essentially. And I was like, that seems kind of far-fetched. Like, could this guy really have paid for the sins of the world? Like, what does that even mean? Did he really exist? Like, surely this is some kind of fairy tale. Like, could this guy really have lived? And I started to look into the evidence for it. And I was like, oh, this guy only lived 2,000 years ago. I thought he lived like ages ago, like generations ago. I mean, it's 20 generations, I suppose, 2,000 years ago. But I was like, that's really not that far in the past. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's, 2024 now. And Jesus is thought to have lived around the year 0, right? The whole calendar almost reset when Jesus was born, BC, AD. And so I was like, it's only 2,000 years ago this guy lived. And I started to look at, he was actually like 30 years old when he started his ministry and started to actually like tell people and perform miracles and claimed to be the Son of God. I thought he was like this really old person, like, 80 years old, 70 years old, 60 years old, right? Surely he wasn't 30 years old. That's crazy. And then I find out that his disciples, which were like his students, he had 12 disciples while he was on earth. They were like teenagers up until 25 years old or something. And I was like, this is like this, they're like the same age as me. And they're like following this guy. I could start to see myself in these people, in these disciples, in this person of Jesus. And really the whole crux of the Christian faith comes down to, did Jesus really die? And did he really come back to life? If that didn't happen, then all of his teachings are essentially a moot point. Like, he claimed that he was going to die and be resurrected. And he also claimed a lot of other things, like how you should live and what you should do with your body and what you should do with your finances. And so if he claimed all these things as being from God and that he was from God, then if he was able to die and come back to life, then that is really strong evidence that he really is from God. I don't know anybody that's ever died and come back to life. And Jesus is the only person to have claimed to have done that, and apparently to have done it. So what's the evidence that he really did that? And so I started looking into the proof that he really was dead and that he really was crucified and that he really came back to life. And really what convinced me ultimately to truly believe in Jesus, his death and resurrection, was the faith and how the actions of his 12 disciples changed, where they were scared to say that they even knew him as he was being sent to crucifixion, to the point where one of his disciples, Peter, denies him 3 times publicly, saying, I don't know that guy. I don't know that guy. The last time he curses, the Bible says, and says, I don't know that guy. And so he was like Jesus' best friend and is denying even knowing him because he's scared of dying. And he's questioning, was this guy really the Son of God? Like, was he really God if he's now going to just get killed? I thought he was God. Like, couldn't he do anything? I would have probably thought that's the same thing. And they were scared, like, oh, well, we know him. They're going to kill us too. I don't want to get killed. And then to where Jesus apparently resurrects 3 days later and comes to visit them all. And they're changed to the point where they go out and publicly proclaim that they've seen the resurrected Jesus and that these people killed him and that y'all are wrong and that you need to truly believe in this because it's true. We've seen it with our own eyes, to the point where 11 of the 12 disciples are ultimately martyred, killed for their public declaration of Jesus. And I wouldn't want to publicly declare something that I didn't really believe was true, to the point where I was going to die for it, where they really had nothing to gain from this declaration, right? Thinking about what worldly desires people have, and these being, 25-year-old men, surely they were consumed with thoughts of, money, fame, power, greed, sex, women. And by publicly proclaiming belief in Jesus, they really weren't getting any of those benefits. They couldn't have sex unless it was with their wife, right? They weren't getting more power. If anything, they were being more oppressed. They were being sent to prison. They were being killed for their belief. They weren't getting any more famous. They were all killed. And there really was no ulterior motive I could see behind why they were doing this, other than they truly believed that their teacher, Jesus Christ, was the Son of God, did all the things that he said he was going to do, and came back to life. And so they weren't afraid of death anymore because they had seen their teacher come back to life. So they weren't afraid of dying anymore. And their teacher told them, Jesus told them to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so that's what they did, right? So I was like, man, if these guys could do this 2,000 years ago, and we're still talking about it today, 2024 years later, we have this book called the Bible. There's churches all over the world. There's churches all over the US. Though there aren't perfect people in churches, there are so much growth and evidence for this being true to where it's the most widely believed religion across the world, to where maybe this really was true. And that really confirmed it for me, was my own belief that there was a God, and then the evidence pointing to the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and the change of his disciples. And then joining this men's small group to see other guys were going through similar things to me, and they had this love and joy about them after they were following Jesus. And I was like convinced that this is really the truth. And so I began to count the cost of what it was going to take to actually follow Jesus. The Bible talks about before someone goes to do something, before someone goes to construct a building or plow a field, they take thought on what it's going to take, how much effort is it going to be, how much money is it going to be. And so I began to count the cost of, okay, if I'm going to really follow this Jesus person and truly surrender my life to God, then what's that going to cost me? And I was like, well, it's going to cost me a lot of things. I'm going to have to make a lot of changes in my life. And I was at this place where I was so broken that I was willing to make changes because what I had been doing had not gotten me to where I wanted to go. It had gotten me to brokenness and shame and guilt and no community around me. And I was like, I really think that this Jesus guy is real, and I'm really truly going to surrender my life to him. And so I remember saying a prayer, a true prayer for the first time in my life in my shower at the building where I'm at now, in my apartment, where I got on my knees in the shower and I asked Jesus to come into my life and to change me and to forgive me of my sins and how I had been living and how I had treated women and how I had treated my own body and how I had treated friends and family and just living all for myself, and that I wanted to become a new person and I wanted to follow Jesus to the best of my ability from that day forward. And so that's what I did. I accepted Jesus in July of 2021, and it's been almost 3 years now since that's happened. And I'll say my life has been abundantly better and more fulfilling and more purposeful and more exciting and joyful since following Jesus. I have now been over 3 years without watching pornography or having sex. And that is something that if you had told me that 3 years ago, I would have thought that you're crazy. There's no way anybody can go 3 years without having sex or masturbating, let alone me, who had been so conditioned to do that since I was a little kid. And I thought there's no way that I could break free of that addiction and that cycle. And through community, through accountability, through other men in my life, through the Word of God, and through true belief in Jesus and prayer, that God has allowed me to break free from that addiction. And it's really amazing. And it's something that I'm not ashamed to talk about. And I think is something that isn't talked about enough from men, is the battle that we have on a daily basis with our flesh. And so I don't say that to say that I'm better than anybody, or that if you're someone that is struggling with sexuality and addiction, that I hope that inspires you, that, okay, that guy Carlton has done it for 3 years. Wow. Like, I guess it really is possible. And so I am excited to wrap up the podcast here. I'm excited to continue to follow the promptings of the Lord. There's been a lot of ups and downs and highs and lows, to be honest, since becoming a Christian and following Jesus in July. I started to read the Bible for the first time ever after putting my faith in Jesus. I never had even read any of the Bible to this point. I had just come to faith truly in my own research through YouTube videos and testimony videos and things like this, and just friends around me, and getting plugged in with people who really cared about me and loved me, and started to read the Bible. I started to read in the book of John, and then I started to read the book of Acts. And as I was reading through the book of Acts, I came across the story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts, where the Ethiopian eunuch is reading the Bible and reading Isaiah 53, and he asks Philip, what is this talking about? Who is this chapter? Who is this verse referring to? And Philip shares him the gospel, and the Ethiopian eunuch becomes someone that believes in Jesus through that story. And he asks Philip, well, here's some water over here. Philip, why can't I get baptized right now? And Philip goes and baptizes him, the Bible says. And so I had never been baptized my whole life at this point. And as I was reading that, I just got really convicted almost that, okay, I don't need to wait anymore. I don't need to delay this. I really believe. And so if the Ethiopian eunuch can get baptized immediately because of his belief in Jesus, and to signify the change that's happened in his life, signify an inward change through outward baptism, then that's what I should do as well. And so I got baptized in October of 2021, and that was an awesome day. My family came, and a lot of friends that I had met through church came, and I really truly believed in Jesus, and I wanted people to know about it, and I wasn't ashamed of it. And I still wear this bracelet that I actually wore the night of the day of my baptism. And I don't know why I wore it during that day. I just felt a prompting from God to wear it, and I still wear it every day. If you're not watching on YouTube, it's a orange bracelet, and just helps me remember that Jesus has redeemed my life, and I've been forever changed through him. And so I am doing my best every day to follow Jesus since, and I'm still plugged in with that men's group through Passion City Church, and have so many great friends and memories from that group over the last 3 years, and those guys have completely changed my life. I am excited to have some of them come on the podcast and share their stories and share their journeys to faith, and advice that they would have for their younger selves, and how they're navigating dating and relationships, and how they're navigating their time being single. And we still meet at Passion City Church. We have over 100 guys in the group, which is crazy. When I first joined, we had like 7. And so that's been amazing to be a part of. And then I have been able to lead a Bible study at my work for the last year and a half, which has been a total blessing, and something that has really helped me find a lot more purpose and meaning behind my job, and building community and encouraging one another at work and talking about faith and religion in the workplace is something I would have thought was crazy, or you can't do that at work. Like that's kind of crossing the line before I became a Christian. And as I've grown in my faith and have learned to hear God's voice more, I felt like he was leading me to do that, and it's been awesome. And I took a year off of dating last year, and I felt like that was something God was still telling me to do, was to surrender an entire year of my life to him, just to focus on my relationship with him. And I read the entire Bible last year in the calendar year of 2023, and something I never had done before. I had never, read any of the Bible before the summer of 2021. And then I had started to read, bits and pieces, but I never read the whole thing until last year. And something that I felt, if I'm going to base my life on this belief and this person of Jesus and a true belief in God, then if this is really the word of God, then I should probably read what it says, and I should probably understand it to the best that I can. And so I'm not some Bible expert. I haven't gone to school for the Bible, but I did read the entire thing last year, and it's something that I am proud to have done, and just to see the whole story of how God was working from the beginning of creation all the way through the book of Revelation to where Jesus is going to come back again one day. I truly believe that. And he's going to create a new heaven and a new earth. And those that truly believe in Jesus will be with Jesus forever in eternity. And I am excited and hopeful for that day. And until that comes, I have been given gifts and talents that are unique to me. And if I don't use them, then God is going to take them away, or he's not going to continue to bless them. And so I was praying at the end of last year, and I believe God put it on my heart and in my mind that I should use this time where I'm single and growing in my relationship with Jesus, and have now great community and friends around me to speak into life as a single man who is following Jesus, with the hope to inspire single men who are not religious, who are not Christians, who are trying to figure out their life as a young adult, that this podcast can help to inspire you. And so that's my story. That's my testimony. I am excited for the future of the podcast, and I feel strongly that even if it helps one person out there, me sharing my story and me creating this podcast, then it's worth it. If I had somehow come across a story like this 3 years ago, when I was making foolish decisions and doing things that I look back and regret doing, then maybe my life would have been different. And if I can boldly share my story and bring other men on to share their story to help inspire single men out there, then it's worth it. And all the work that's gone into the podcast to this point, I don't know anything about podcasting or video editing or content creation. I'm trying to figure everything out. And even to get to this point, I've put in so much time and effort, and been very prayerful and sought counsel from mentors of mine. And I am excited for the future. I don't have to obey human beings. I have to be obedient to God. And that's one of my favorite verses in Acts chapter 5, verse 29, where Peter is talking to the Sanhedrin and says, we must obey God, not human beings, as they're telling him to stop talking about Jesus. And so God's given me the vision and the ability and the platform to create a podcast like this. And I'm honored to share my testimony and my story today with all the listeners and with you specifically. And so I hope that this has encouraged you. I am praying for the podcast and the future of it. And I'm praying for you as a listener. And if there's anything I can do to encourage you, or you have questions about the future of the podcast, my vision for it, I would encourage you to go back and listen to last week's episode where I touched more on the future of the podcast. And you're welcome to send me a DM on Instagram or reach out through social media, and I would love to interact with you and hopefully point you to Jesus and encourage you in your life and your spiritual pursuits. And so next week we will start having guests on, and I'm excited to have some amazing guests come on to share about their story, to share about how they have come to faith in Jesus, to share about advice that they would give to their younger self if they could somehow go into a time machine and talk to their younger self, and explore the topic of dating from a Christian perspective, from single men who are navigating it themselves currently. And I think that's going to be really unique and unlock a lot of great wisdom and advice for single men out there who are trying to navigate this complex world and society we live in, and the pressures of dating and relationships and marriage, and talk to real men who are going through it themselves. And what are they doing that's been successful? How are they navigating relationships and dating? And I'm fired up to have these conversations and to have so many amazing men come on that I personally know and have been able to grow close relationships with. And I'm excited for you to be able to be a listener and to absorb and to learn. And going to wrap up the episode here. And I really appreciate you tuning in to my story and my testimony. Again, this has been Carlton French, the host of the Single Man Podcast. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday. If this encouraged you, or you think a friend of yours might be able to benefit from it, I'd love if you'd shoot them a link to the podcast, shoot them a text, tell them to, hey, check out this podcast, check out the Single Man Podcast, check out this guy Carlton. He has a story I think you'll really be inspired by. And so I appreciate you listening, and I will talk to you again next Friday. This has been the Single Man Podcast. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Single Man Podcast. If someone you know would benefit from this week's episode, I'd love for you to text them the link and invite them to listen. You never know how a simple invitation could change someone's life. We'll be back next Friday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, with a new episode. Until then, check out the video version of the podcast on YouTube, and you can engage with us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.